What has servant leadership, faith, 10x, 180-degree turnarounds, a new book on servant leadership, 8 children? What have they all got together? Well, if you want the answer, it's my next guest, Tracy Curington. Let's go.
Hi folks, welcome to the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast by Gary Ryan from Organisations That Matter. In this podcast, Gary shares everything about servant leadership, service leadership, authentic leadership, how to create high-performance cultures, service excellence, and life balance. Here's your host, Gary Ryan.
Tracy Curington, it's an absolute delight to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Gary. I'm super excited about having a good conversation together.
Thank you. And I think we've known each other for about nearly 18 months now, online mostly, but we did get to meet earlier in person in March.
Which was my pleasure.
Yeah, and mine too. I got to say, it was great to meet you and April, of course.
Yeah.
So, it's a delight to be able to meet you in person and say good day. I think we might have even had a little dance at one stage.
Yeah, yeah, we sure did.
Now, one of the things we love to talk about, because we're going to talk about all things servant leadership, we're going to talk 10X, we're going to talk families, but I always like to know about the names of businesses. So Curington Enterprises is the umbrella organization that you operate under, but a lot of your work is under the name of 180-degree turnarounds. Can you tell us about the story of that name, please?
Yeah, so that and that came about. I've never worked in a quick service restaurant in my life until 2016. I joined Chick-fil-A, an organization in the States, very popular. And it's known for its speed of service. It's known for its order accuracy. It's also known for its servant leadership. And and it's had a lot of, John Maxwell's had a lot of influence with Chick-fil-A in the early days coming up. And so, and he talks a lot about servant leadership as well. So the 180 turnarounds came about when I went into business in the coaching, and I was only getting, like I just said, I'm not dealing with restaurants, but they just kept on coming to me. And when they came to me, they were having issues where they were going in one direction. And when I made just like a slight course correction to them, it kind of turned around their business to now they're generating revenues, or maybe their issue was, we just can't keep good people. And I said, well, I mean, just let's talk about the people that are leaving. And we found out that the people that were leaving, they needed to go. And so the problem wasn't keeping good people. They thought their good people were leaving and leaving their bad people. They were just hiring wrong in the first place. And so we made a course correction, and it kind of, man, that guy turned my business around. And so when they started saying comments like that, they say success leaves clues.
Yes.
And so people are saying something about you. I've often done an interview, and I'm headed somewhere, but I've often done interviews, and I'll say, I'll ask, what's your greatest strength? And I found that sometimes that stumps people. And they're like, well, I don't know. I say, let me say it this way. If somebody was going to give you some praise, if they were going to give you a compliment, and it's something you've heard other people say before, what do they say? That helps, it gives a clue at least to what your strengths are, because man, that guy Tracy, he's just such a nice guy. Okay, then being nice might be a strength of yours. People-centric might be a strength of yours. And so anyway, I started saying that. And so we're doing this turnaround thing. People were saying, man, that guy turned my business around. And I thought, well, okay, when you turn it around, if you turn something around, you've done an about face. You've done a 180-degree turn. You haven't done a 360, because if you've done a 360, you're right back in the same direction, right? So we've done half that. We've done like that guy turned me around. Okay, we turn around. Now we're pointing in the right direction. So 180 turnarounds was born.
I love it. I love it, because there's always a story, right? So you'd obviously started doing your work, and you called yourself whatever you called yourself at the time, and then over time, you
TMC coaching. It was just like my initials are TMC, Tracy Matthew Curington, and I just thought, well, let's not really outthink it. Let's just do my name, and so TMC coaching, and then I added on consulting, because I was doing a little bit of consulting work in food service and so forth. And then TMC coaching, we branded again from TMC coaching, keeping that business going with private clients. And then I moved into those that were needing a turnaround. And so we have this playbook about how do we do a turnaround in their marketing. We do it in their revenue. We do these different platforms. And so 180 Turnarounds became like the umbrella until we just recently rebranded to Curington Enterprises because we have so many different businesses that we're operating now.
Yeah, it's just brilliant. And I love that growth and development of your own organization and the breadth that it's gone to over time, Tracy. And at the time, I think when you were at work at Chick-fil-A, Cheryl Bachelder had come in out of retirement to be the CEO. Is that name sound familiar to you?
Yeah. So there was back when I was with Chick-fil-A. Of course, Truett Cathy had already passed away, and his son Dan Cathy had taken over. And during the course of my time there, and I got to meet Bubba. I got to go down there and meet Bubba Cathy and Dan Cathy and shake their hands. And we did a little bit of work there at the headquarters. Everything you've heard about them, you always wonder, yeah, is it real? Is it true? And then you go, it's kind of like our 10X. Like, is it real? Is Grant really this guy? And then you go and meet him. You're like, dude, he's the real thing. He's real. So that it was a real deal. I was really blown away. And at that time, as far as the CEO, I don't know exactly the CEO. I just know I met Dan, met Bubba. Dad was running it, and now their grandson is running it.
Yes, because Cheryl's story is that she turned around Popeyes purely using servant leadership from 2007 through to 2015. And then she went on a bit of a hiatus, and she thought, because she wanted to prove that servant leadership could work. So she was completely upfront when she got hired at Popeyes that she was going to use servant leadership. She wrote a book, Dare to Serve, which is a great book that you might be familiar with. And then there was a couple of years break, and then next minute she popped up at Chick-fil-A, and I went, oh, that's interesting. And then understanding that Chick-fil-A already had that servant leadership philosophy, that sort of made a lot of sense. And, for these food service organizations to be going down that path and to have servant leadership as the underpinning of their philosophy for how they operate their business and work with people, considering how we both know, I mean, they're high intense, environments and very tough, customers demanding a lot, a lot of customers. They're great test fields, if you like, for servant leadership, which takes us to your most recent book, which I absolutely loved, and I love interviewing people in the servant leadership path. The toughest challenges for servant leaders, because there are. Once you even understand what servant leadership is, it becomes tough immediately, and practical ways to solve them. The catalyst for the book, what was it?
I was having on the quick service restaurant, and then I was meeting with a group. So I was growing that side, and then I met with a group in the oil field. So the oil field, you've got a little bit more gruff, rough, but those guys, even though, and ladies, even though they have like more of a rough exterior, they have a heart inside. And one of the biggest things that they were struggling with at the time we were going through, it was the first time that the owner, this company will do like $1 million in a week. That's just what they do. They had 425 on staff. COVID hit, and he had to let people go. First time they'd ever had to do that in all their history. When they had to do that, he felt broken inside. The owner, he felt broken inside. He wept when he asked me to come and serve them. And he said, I want The Power of Positive Thinking is a book that he gives everybody. Everybody's a new hire. They get the power of positive thinking. He said, I want a positive attitude, and I want something around servant leadership. So the book cut its teeth serving it went down to 250, and now it's rebounded. It's like 475 employees now over time. So he's back up even beyond where he was before. But he said, now that we've had to let these things go, we're kind of crushed, we're broken. COVID hit us, kind of stuck everything. New president comes in, shuts down a pipeline. And so now they're torn, right? So it was good time for them to work on their leaders, because the two things that he values most is a positive attitude and servant leadership. So I kind of morphed them all together, and I saw this showing up in his team where we have to terminate somebody. But if we're a servant leader, what about his family? You see the conflict. The conflict was, if I let him go, how will his family survive?
100%.
And like, if I let him go, then what about our relationship? And so what I built was, I just built a couple of outlines on my own, just speaking into the needs that they'd have. They'd address the needs. We'd spend a couple of minutes talking about them. I'd go back to the drawing board before next week's meeting, and I'd write up another outline. And by the end of it, I had these 13 chapters. I actually only had 12 chapters. And then the one that like kind of was a bonus was the terminating employment. Yes. At the very end, I said, did I miss any in this? He said, I would love to have something about employment and like, how do you fire somebody the right way? How do you let somebody go? I said, that's a great challenge. So I incorporated that in the book, where originally it wasn't even going to be in there. So it leads me to believe there's more challenges out there than what I've taken the challenge to write about in the book.
Well, I love that you had the courage to write about termination, because I believe that is, from a business point of view, one of the greatest challenges for business leaders and owners who believe in servant leadership, is how to do that properly and well. And you know, it's a tricky balance. But ultimately, if your organization doesn't survive, more people suffer.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and your people, I've heard it said this way. I heard it say this way a while back, and I kind of course corrected my thoughts on that. They said, you know, your people are a company's greatest asset. And I was like, you know, I like to think about my car as an asset, a computer as an asset, but I don't like to think about flesh and blood as assets. But so I corrected it, and I think your people are a company's greatest competitive advantage.
100%. Yes.
What makes you different in your company than anybody else's is the people that you hire and how you train them. And have you ever heard somebody will say, you know, would you rather have somebody coming in from the same industry that worked somewhere else for 10 years and they come into your company, or would you rather train a blank canvas? And when I think of it, I'd rather train the blank canvas myself, because then you don't get this, oh, I know. Well, over here, we did it this way, because you get to train somebody that doesn't know anything. And you get to kind of groom them and mold them and shape them into what you want them to be to serve your organization. Yeah. Versus having to, you know, there's in your life and mine. And it seems like, are you 56?
Yes, I am 56. Yes.
You look great for 56. When I'm 56, I want to look like my hero, Gary. But just thinking in like, as we grow older, as we learn a lot, I've had to confess, I knew a lot of things in my 20s. And then in my 40s, I realized a lot of the things that I knew just weren't true.
Yes, absolutely.
There came a point in my life where I have to grow up. I have to grow beyond that. And so when I hire, I don't mind looking at somebody's application that doesn't have a lot of experience, as long as they have the desire to grow. That's one thing I'm looking for.
Yeah, I can tell you, I've grown and learned a lot in my 50s. I found a lot of so-called truths weren't true, and at that time of my life, you know, and I'm excited by that, and I want to keep learning. I want to keep discovering the truths that I thought were true that aren't. You're right. So it's also fascinating, and also believe courageous, that the first chapter of your book's about conflict, right? And I think now that I'm hearing the backgrounds about the oil organizations and the hardness of it sort of makes a lot of sense, because when I'm reading your book and it's like, hey, right, and you acknowledge it, yeah, hey, am I really starting a book about conflict, and a servant leadership book about conflict? And the answer is yes, I am. Here we go. Let's get into it. I'm thinking that's both courageous and awesome. So now that penny has dropped for me to make sense. And just for the folk that might be tuning into our chat, what can you tell them about that chapter?
So, okay, that chapter came as a result of when we talk about the toughest challenges. There are two types of people. There are those people that come to a swimming pool and they wade into it. They tip their toe in, it's a little cool. They tip their ankle in, it's still a little cool. And then they're like shivering. I'm the guy that just give me the diving board. I'm just going to jump in and just take care of it all at once. Just get used to it as quickly as possible. Like the faster I make mistakes, you know, the better. Because then like, oh, okay, I learned from it. You know, I moved on. So I thought, well, let's just throw this one at the front. And because I feel like this in public speaking, I've done a lot of public speaking for the last 20 years. And in public speaking, people give you, just because you have guts enough to be on the stage, they'll gift you the first 30 seconds to 3 minutes as a gift, just because maybe the event planner, they respect her or him. Maybe just because you've got guts enough to be up there, they'll give, because they say that in America, the number one fear is public speaking. I don't know what it's like on a global front, but it is a fear. So they're going to gift me 30 seconds to 3 minutes. If I don't capture their attention in the first 30 seconds to 3 minutes, that's why it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. They call me Ishmael. I mean, like, that's how Moby Dick opens, and it closes. I remember Moby Dick, it closes with words from the book of Job in the Bible, and I alone am escaped to tell thee. Like, I still remember those because the way that it opens and the way that it closed. So following Moby Dick, Herman Melville's book, Moby Dick, They Call Me Ishmael is just a great line to start with a book. And, or the best of times, worst of times, like Charles Dickens. And the way that they close, I remember that. So I thought, what are 2 chapters from the book that are my favorites that I can open with and I can close with? And Terminating Employment was one of my favorites, and Handling Conflict was so, like, when you look at the 2, Terminating Employment doesn't sound like a great one to start with. It sounds like one that, like, wait, it's coming, the climax is coming, and then boom, like, you had to wait through all this. So I want people to read the entire book. So if they read it in succession, now this is the way that the book is structured. It's structured for masterminds, because I do a lot of masterminds in my business. It's structured because you can find the nuggets really easy. It's done in bullet points, much like your book. Your book, Yes for Success, that I've got, also fantastic read. It was an easy read because you write like I want to understand. I understand the world around me. Bullet points. Make it stand out to me to where I know where to go and I don't forget. I always read with a yellow highlighter and a black pen.
Yes.
For those things. But anyway, so Handling Conflict. Let me give you just the insights on that, where that came from. Handling conflict, as far as the truth in that chapter, that in a nutshell, if I were to put it there, I was probably 18 or 19, maybe 20 years old. And my dad taught me, he said, son, all wrongs need to be righted, but not all wrongs need to be righted by you. Mm-hmm. And I never forgot that.
Yeah, they're very wise.
All wrongs need to be righted, but they don't all need to be righted by you. And it helped me to stay in my lane. He was sharing with me as far as conflict. If there's conflict, let's call it a wrong. Conflict is wrong. But just because you're in charge doesn't necessarily mean it is your wrong to right, especially when you have a team. You could cut your leaders off at the knees if you go around correcting all their wrongs. Now the team has no respect for their leader, they're the sub-leader, because you solve all the problems. So all wrongs need to be righted. So I come up with this thing, okay, all wrongs need to be righted. That's principle number 1. But not all wrongs need to be righted by me. If it is a wrong that has to be righted by me, I will not create more wrong in trying to right it. And when I do right it, I'm going to choose the right time, place, and proper attitude to right it. So those 4 principles has helped me. And I was 19 years old, and I was the supervisor for a 4-star restaurant in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was a steak restaurant and everything. And I was leading guys twice my age in the restaurant. It was my first leadership experience. And my dad, I shared some of the things that were going on. And my dad said, hey, that doesn't sound like that's a wrong you need to right. And I thought, that's when he shared me that. So I kind of put my life's learning around those 4 principles that he taught me and put it into a chapter.
And that's a beautiful way to acknowledge Dad. So let's hear his name, please.
His name is David.
David Curington, right?
So David Curington, and he's still around. In fact, him and my mom, I built a loft apartment over my garage for them to stay. They've been with me the last 5 years, and they've got their own place. They move out this officially next week.
Oh, wow. That's a big moment too. 5 years to I'm sure they're not moving too far away, but that's a
no. I'm the oldest of their 4 kids. I've got a younger sister and 2 younger brothers, and they're with me because I'm number 1. It all started with me. I'm the first child, first grandchild, and so in a lot of ways, and I do mean this, just in case my siblings see this podcast, I do mean this way. I'm the favorite.
Of course you are. I can't claim to be number 1 because I'm number 9.
That's a big family. So number 9 doesn't sound like the youngest of the family. How many were there total?
There's 11 of us, and I'm a twin. So me and my twin were 9 and 10. I came out first out of us too. So, probably possibly like your number 8, and maybe even your numbers 5, 6, 7, and 8. most families don't have more than two these days, and
Right.
rarely do they have more than three, and it's rarer again that they've got more than four. Okay. So I realized at quite a young age personally, Tracy, that, the fact that I got born, I should just be grateful.
Yeah.
Literally, I should be just
Yeah.
grateful that I got to be born. And
Yeah.
therefore, when all the crappy things in life come, it's like, well, at least you're here to experience it, Gary. Pick yourself up. Let's go.
Yeah.
And maybe that's corny, but I do actually believe that to be
I
true.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think I've gotten a lot. So my wife and I, we've been married for 27 years. We have 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. So we got the first two sons are 364 days apart, and we didn't never plan this. I wanted to, just like everybody else, all normal families. I wanted to, and I know kind of we're leaning into the family component, but so those two. And by the way, anybody watching your podcast, if somebody tells you that you cannot get pregnant while nursing, bullcrap. That is not true. So like we were told when we were kids, like we were just married, and then like it's like 10 months later, we just got married and bang, we're gonna have a kid. And then after that, like we were told you can't get pregnant, so don't have to worry about any kind of protection or something like that, because you can't get pregnant while you're nursing a baby. And that's not true. So because 364 days later, we had our second son. And then, we did have 3 miscarriages throughout the first 5 being born. And of course, now that some of them are getting married and things, so we're down to the last 3. We got 3 more remaining in our household. And you know what, Gary, I found it is cheaper going out to eat with a family of 5 than it is with a family of 10.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's almost, I've been able to say whatever you want on the menu. Get whatever you want. Because I'm like, when I got the bill, I thought, wait, we're missing some digits. We're missing at least a 0 on this, because this is not as expensive as I expected it would be.
Yeah.
So there are blessings.
As the older ones bring their partners and then their children, and that number will grow again, and you'll be probably paying again. So that,
No doubt, no doubt.
Coming back.
Christmas is definitely an expensive time.
Yeah, look, it is it's rare for 2 people to be chatting that have got 13 children between them, and
Yep.
and we had 2 miscarriages as well, and they were challenging times each time that happened, and you come to terms and you discover just how many people that's true for, though. It's such a I'll say this in lightly inverted commas, it's far more normal than what maybe people realize, and that definitely helped both of us once we understood that. It's just not a very often talked about subject, to be honest.
No, it's not.
And at the same time, it's not often that people got 13 children between them, and maybe that's what's lent both of us to servant leadership. But tell me, let's just share for a moment about servant leadership and raising 8 children, because in my view, the most challenging leadership role I have is being a father.
Yep. Agreed. And I'll go one step further on that one, and I'm sure you'll agree. It's the most important leadership role that I play was to my children.
100%.
Now I understand. I mean, my wife needed positive leadership, and I'm providing that, and that's the kind of dynamic we have in our household. But with our children, the thing that where servant leadership shows up in my life, because John Maxwell has a law in the 21 irrefutable laws. He calls it the law of the lid. And the law of the lid is like, whenever you get frustrated and man, I'm just getting a headache, you've reached your lid, right? When you blow up, and your kids, there's no one else ever alive that can expose where your lid is so fast as your children.
Agreed.
And I found myself, until I came in connection with that law, I didn't know about it. I felt bad when I would, like, oh man, what are you doing? You shouldn't have done, like getting upset with my children. And I had to learn a lot about myself, because, the scripture talks about how a soft answer turneth away wrath. And it also like you can wound the spirit of your child by harsh words. And so when I started reading the book of Proverbs, and by the way, no one on your podcast has to be a believer to find value in Proverbs. Proverbs, the wisest businessman ever and the most wealthiest ever to live. When you read about him in First Kings, you read about him in First Chronicles or Second Chronicles, you read about Solomon and all the business adventures and all the things that he did. There's nobody ever that's going to match Solomon and all of his wisdom, glory, money, and stuff like that. I mean, he's truly got it. And he writes these little pithy statements, and you can find value in that. You can read Proverbs. There's 31 Proverbs in the book, and you could read one chapter of Proverbs one day every month. I did that for 3 years. Just every month I would read Proverbs. I would read a Proverbs every day, every day, every day. So one chapter, probably 16 to 25 verses. And I came across I started to collect these little things that like meant something to me as I'm raising my kids. And so kind of the early outpourings of servant leadership outside of what I saw modeled in my dad, and just a lot of the dynamic of doing it wrong and feeling bad about it. Then when I read Proverbs, I started to started seeing like how this relates to the man that I was being.
Yes. Yes.
And that really helped kind of cultivate this desire. I don't think somebody doesn't like naturally, become a servant leader. I think you're groomed for it. You learn about it. And a lot of it learning is because you've done it the wrong way.
100%. I've definitely learned the most about leadership as a result of my failures as a father, especially in the early days.
Great way to put it.
Wrong. But thankfully, my curiosity and my desire to become better meant that I've been willing along the way to acknowledge the failings. I've apologized to my children.
Boom. Me too. Me too. And there's nothing more telling about a dad to try this apology for the first time and ramble around and like, okay, son, I did it wrong. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And like, I found myself trying to make it his fault. I try to make it her fault. And like, no, it was actually just me.
Yeah. Yeah. To own it.
And that's a tough, it's humbling. And I think one of the hallmarks of a servant leader has got to be humility.
Yes. In all roles of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And truly, I mean, like, somebody said one time they asked me about like, you're a great dad and everything. And I think, well, I appreciate you. I appreciate the sentiment. And I think I know what you mean by that. But even the greatest teacher if he has a lousy student, is not going to help somebody grow.
No.
So I can provide great fatherhood, but if my children are unwilling to learn and grow, the product's still going to be the same.
Yeah. And look, as a result of that, and largely because of learning about servant leadership, etc., one of the most important values and principles, Michelle, that's my wife, and I've tried to instill into our children is to be personally responsible for their learning. Like, people are going to think I'm nuts, right? Which is fine. That we literally, since our children were 3, we've asked them, who's responsible for your learning? and it wasn't mum and dad. Mum and dad have got a big role to play, but they were responsible. So what did that look like? It meant that when they came to us and brought their book to read and where to read with them, we would say, this is great, Liam, this is great, Sienna, this is great, Callum, Aidan and Darcy. Like, you're being responsible for your learning when you do this. Now, they didn't even really understand what that meant at the time, but we repeat. Every time they took an action to demonstrate that they were responsible for their learning. So much so that even while they were at elementary school, primary school, we call it here, when their reports came, it was always their duty to get their report first and then report to us what their report said.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The report wasn't to come to us and then us, like, it's your report. It's your responsibility. You now tell us what's in it.
Yeah. I think those kinds of principles that families, like when you said, we've always said, who's responsible for your learning? We are, Dad. I'm responsible for my learning. It reminded me of like, we had, growing up with a family this big. I mean, who knew that having a family of 10 was going to be so expensive, right? And so, like, you're limited. I mean, like Golden Arches is McDonald's is really where you get to go. That's eating out. And sometimes, like, what? We get to have pop and ice cream tonight? Yeah, we're going to splurge. Like, that was it. So we taught them early on, like, who are content people? Content people are happy with what they got. So we tried to instill that in those little things. And all my kids knew there's 2 things that if you want to make dad hot mad, there's just 2 things. They both start with L, lying and laziness. you're going to get on the wrong side of dad really, really quickly. It's, in our family, we had, what we call capital punishment. Like what's the thing that deserves a spanking or something like that. And I look at spanking as one component of discipline. Like, and I know this is probably a little bit further into the fatherhood, but every family's got to have their form, right? They have their, like, just like every country has their own unique corrections. Every state has, like in our states, we have, the hangman's noose, or like there's capital punishment, or it's just death row forever, or whatever it is. So for ours, laziness, lying, or if you disrespect my wife, like that's their mom, right? But you disrespect my wife, automatic discipline. Lying and laziness, automatic discipline. So because I don't like laziness, I don't like it in me. I don't like it in my children. I don't like messy rooms and, cluttered desk, cluttered mind, cluttered family, disorganized. Everything should have a place, and just put it back. I'm teaching them because I want to make them productive society members.
Yes.
And we've got a lot of children that don't know what to do because they never got trained. They don't know how to take care of their finances on their own. I've never not one time have I paid for my kids' car payment. I didn't pay for their car. I'm not paying for their college tuition. I haven't paid for any of that stuff because I taught them at an early age to work for what you want. If you want it, work for it, work hard for it. No laziness, no lying. That's not going to get you anywhere, and respect.
Yeah.
So, and of course, and that took some discipline, and discipline to me as a father, just for your viewership, the way that I view discipline, you have not disciplined your child just because you put their nose in a corner, or just because you spanked their bottom or something like that. That's not discipline. That's a characteristic, a component. But true discipline is, I need you to go to your room and I need you to think about what you just did. I'll be there in a minute. Now they're in there, they're sitting, they're thinking about it. They're probably thinking, what's going to happen to me? Yes. Right? That's probably what they're thinking. But the idea is that they get time, and it's just like drawn out. It's a process of discipline. Then I'd come in, put my game face on. And I know in my heart's breaking because I know what I have to do. And so, like, remember what you did? What did Daddy say about that? And he said that if that happened, you were going to get a spanking, and now I have to administer correction. All right, roll over. It's always 2, never more, never less. It's always 2. And by the way, what I found, Gary, in administering correction is sometimes just because it's 2 doesn't have to mean it has to be, you have to lay it on there.
No.
Sometimes it's a pop. Like, I was expecting, Dad, you're the greatest, because it didn't hurt. But then sometimes they need to experience the pain, because life sometimes gives you pain. Oh, yeah. And that's how we grow. That's how we learn. So let's suppose the pain had to have now. I want you to sit there and you think about, what you did, and I'll be back. So I go, I cry my eyes out too, because I had to, discipline my kid. Then I come back in the room, and there's no paddle. There's nothing like that. And now the posture's different, right? So before it was like this way, you did wrong. Then I sit down side by side, put my arm around them. This is still part of discipline.
Yes.
I haven't got out of the discipline process. The discipline process started when they did something wrong. Go to your room. I'll be there. Spanking, leave the room. They're thinking about it. They're crying. They're coming back. And I sit down and like, now what happened? I did this. Was that bad? Yeah, that was bad. Like, now we love them. But what hurts me the most is ever having to spank you. I don't never want to do that.
No.
I love you. Why does Daddy spank you? And I love these words. Because he loves me.
Yeah.
Never out of anger and out of haste. But what we want to do as parents, what some parents want to do is they want to shorten that. They want to compress time to get back to what they're doing, and not understanding that it's an opportunity to show them this is what will happen in life if you get it wrong. And so I was taught that as my mom and dad taught me that. And so I've administered the same way. And I think children that make it in life from fathers who love them, that dad had to hold the line.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes become the bad guy, quote unquote, by administering some type of correction.
Yeah. And
in a lot of homes, it's missing.
Yeah. It's really interesting what you were saying about, if you disrespect my wife, because we've run by the same line in my family, like, and especially in a society where a lot of males are, there's a lot of crime against women in society, etc. I believed it's been my right, particularly with my sons, because I've got 4 sons too. So I've got 1 daughter and 4 sons. but also with my daughter, is that you need to respect your mother. And it's always been the message, you know, if there's a conflict between you and your mother and you're disrespecting your mother, I'm standing beside your mother. You need to know that we are a team, right? We are a team, and you're against the team if you want to go there.
Yeah.
Right.
And Gary, you bring it up about your mom and that, and I would tie this back into the first chapter of the book, handling conflict. Remember, all wrongs need to be righted, but not all wrongs need to be righted by you. I'm a hammer, wrong's a nail. Wham! Right? I'm gonna put that thing down. Well, sometimes my wife, it was her wrong to right.
Correct.
And I was coming in thinking that because I'm the man, I'm supposed to be doing this, and maybe discipline a child or maybe talk them down. And she's like, hey, I already took care of that. And I had to learn, this is not my area. I should not be writing. This is not my wrong to right. It's a wrong and it does need to be righted, but just not by me.
Correct.
What a principle that, like, servant leadership transcends business. I mean, servant leadership is found in nonprofits. It's found in churches. It's found in households. It's found in governments. Servant leadership transcends. And so the power of the 13 chapters is found, like, these are things that navigating change is one of the toughest challenges as a leader. I mean, who do I need to communicate? Sometimes we jerk the steering wheel and scare everybody that's following us. When you navigate change, you have to consider, who's this going to affect most? And have that conversation. So I'm right now in a transition of sorts in my life, transitioning out of 20 years of being a pastor into more business and servant leadership outside of that in that next phase. But before I've ever had this conversation with you, I've had this conversation with my son, my daughters. I've let my siblings even know.
Of course.
Because I'm handling change and I want to let them know. I don't want the world to let them know, or social media posts to let them know that, well, I didn't know he was doing that. You're navigating change. Who do you need to tell? Who's going to be impacted by this change?
It's so impactful, and we're going to have the book is going to pop up in this podcast, folks. You'll be able to see the book. We'll have the link for it available on Amazon. Can people get it also directly through you, Tracy?
They can get it directly through me. But Amazon's probably the fastest way to get it. I buy all my books through Amazon unless it's like a rare find and maybe it's thrift books or something like that. But yeah, you can find me on Amazon.
Yeah, we'll do that too. We'll also have lots of links for your business as well, for people to be able to reach out to you. Both of us are wearing a pin.
Yes.
We're wearing a pin. And that is actually what connected you and I. I'm just to wrap up our conversation, I'm interested in how you've made sense of 10X and how that's aligned with servant leadership, because I've had to go on my own journey with that too. So I'm interested on your perspective.
This is actually, you're the first person that's ever asked me about, I've heard Grant say, hey, what do you think of when you see 10X, when you hear of 10X or whatever. I've never seen this answer, never heard anybody give this answer. There's one time in the Bible, in the book of Daniel. Now, Daniel was a prophet in the Old Testament. You've likely heard of Daniel in the lion's den. And he was put in the lion's den because of prayer. The government had outlawed prayer at a certain time. And he said, well, I have to pray. I got to talk to my Lord. So he did it anyway, because there was a higher power. There was a higher authority. But the cool thing about Daniel, when he was revealed in the country and put on this pedestal of having authority in a land that he didn't even speak the language, it was because when they viewed him, he was 10 times better than others that were in the land. He was 10 times better. The experience of 10X for me ties back to spiritual roots for me. Okay. And that always impressed me before I ever even knew about 10X. I think it's Daniel chapter 1, if not Daniel chapter 2. And it talks about how they were these Daniel and there's 3 Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were the ones in the fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar had threw them in there because they wouldn't bow down to this image. And so because of who they were, their reputation, they were seen among everybody else as being 10 times better. And so when I think of 10X to me means I want to be 10 times better than the version I used to be. I want
Yes.
to be 10 times better. My name, my reputation is important to me. And I would love to be, I'm wearing it on proudly as a badge. It means a badge of courage, a badge of honor. But 10 times better, I think of Daniel in a strange country, and as far as tying it into servant leadership, read the book of Daniel. You're going to find he's a servant leader, that he was always there to help, whether it was, the 3 Hebrew boys that he was helping out, or kings that, wicked kings in many cases that he was helping out. So
Yeah.
that's how I tie in, because I have strong, deep Christian values, but that doesn't mean that I can't go out and make money.
Exactly. And we live in a society that has an economic reality. And I think one of the things that both of us would agree with Grant is that you can help more people if you've got more money.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean you can't help people if you don't have money.
Yeah.
But it is true that you can help more people that if you do,
Yeah.
and I was just having a chat with my 17-year-old son yesterday about, imagine that you just through a meeting of sorts, you met a couple, a young family who had fallen on hard times, who through no fault of their own had done everything they possibly can within their control, but they've fallen on really hard economic times, and imagine if you had the power to say, here's $100,000.
Yeah.
You don't have to give it back to me.
Yeah. Right.
Like he's like, well, I'll also provide some support so that you can use that $100,000 wisely and not stupidly. I said, imagine if you had that capability to do that, well, people like Grant can.
Yeah.
And I certainly have met people in my life that I would have loved to have been able to, if, it's not just about the dollars. It's not like giving dollars and walking away, but it's about that element can make a massive difference. I mean, how many suicides happen because of economic reasons?
Yeah.
That you would know people. I know people that pressure. They've lost a job. They've and everything that then comes with that, and they've still got this economic pressure. And I have to say that coming into the 10X world, I've learned a lot about money and how it works that I did not know.
Yep, me too. Yep. And you're so right. One of the, when you say the penny fell or the domino fell or whatever, that knocked me into Grant's group. I heard Grant, and it was in like 2020 or whatever. We were going through the pandemic, and I was listening to some podcasts. I wanted to check up on him because I didn't really follow him until then. I had time. I was like, who is this guy? First time I ever saw him, swipe. Who is this guy? I didn't know anything about him. And then he started growing on me, and some of the things that he was saying, just like, oh man, he's so right. And he said one thing like, a penny saved is a penny earned. Yeah, but it's still a penny, and I'm hunting down dollars. I'm like, oh my goodness, that is so true. And that kind of stuff. So it took mindset shift. It took a mindset shift for me. But one thing that he alluded to, and he may have even said these words, I know I heard it later on, I heard it from another guy. He said, for me, God needs you to be rich. He needs you to be wealthy because you know how to handle it. Whereas other people don't have the attitude, like they've inherited money or something like that, and they've wasted it on themselves and stuff like that. You know what you would do with it if you had it. And so I'm thinking that's so true. And then recently I heard Grant say this on one of the webinars you and I were both on. He said, I want to make sure I quote this right. He talked about, he said, God built greatness in you, but it's up to you to prove it.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my goodness, I've said that so many times, that there's greatness in you because the designer put it there. But if you don't live your life to your fullest potential, you're not verifying that a great designer built greatness in you.
Oh yeah.
Because he didn't build you to be average.
No,
he built you to be extraordinary.
You just used the word, right? The word, I've been talking about that since 2010 when I was first teaching Yes for Success as a program. And I should have written this book back in 2010, but it didn't come out till last year. But in the introduction, I talk about, as you would know, anyone that's ever held a newborn baby in their arms knows that newborn baby is extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
And I often reference our good friend Nick Yerhart, who was born dead,
right?
And then revived after birth. And Hell, was he extraordinary when his mother held him?
Inspirational. Yeah.
Of course he was, right? And it turns out that he had cerebral palsy even at that moment when she's looking at an extraordinary child. And with cerebral palsy, Nick Yerhart is 100% extraordinary.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So we are all born extraordinary, but we've got to go and find it. We've got to go find that greatness, as you just quoted with Grant. And that's a great place to leave our conversation with one last question.
Yes, sir.
It is called the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast. What does moving beyond being good mean to you, Tracy?
Moving beyond being good. Okay, so Jim Collins, good to great. Moving beyond good, good enough isn't enough. Like, good enough is not enough. It's the wrong target. I wasn't meant to be good. I was meant for greatness. And so moving beyond good, most people are satisfied with good. And I don't want, I want something great. I want something amazing. I want to move beyond good. Now, what are the levels beyond good? I mean, what a great talk we could have around that. Moving beyond good. Well, okay, there's great, there's amazing, there's remarkable, there's fantastic, there's glorious, there's legendary, there's so much more beyond good. I think good is average.
Yeah, I agree.
And I wasn't meant for average.
Yeah.
But it is, I wasn't meant for ordinary.
Yeah. Now this is, I've never revealed this on the podcast before. This is the first, right? And this podcast has been going since 2009, right? So,
wow.
Right. When I was young, I was given a gift and it was a mug. I think it was about my 9th birthday. And it had the Gaelic interpretation of my name, Gary, and what it meant. And it had courageous and it had great. Serious, right?
Wow.
So as a young child, I had this, I have a duty to be great, right? Mm-hmm. And I must admit, I have spent a lot of
live up to your name.
Yeah, 100%. I spent a lot of my life going, what am I doing to be great? And I've had different interpretations of what that means, et cetera, over time. I'm pretty comfortable with what it means now. But one of the core reasons for the name of Moving Beyond Being Good is because it is about being extraordinary. It is about being great. It is certainly not about being the average of good, as you kindly just described, Tracy. And it is about being true to my name. So there's the core reason for why this is called Moving Beyond Being Good for this podcast. And of course, once I got exposed to 10X, as like alignment, this makes sense. Yep. And that's why
I've come home. One of the big things I said about coming to 10X was I've come home. These are my kind of people.
Yeah. Oh, look,
they challenge me to be a better version of myself, to be what I've always meant to be.
Yeah.
It's not always comfortable.
No, it's not. I resisted Grant for a year from my twin brother saying, you should be listening to this guy. You should be tuning. He's looking for coaches. You're an awesome coach. You should be one of his coaches. This is what my twin brother who lives in the States was saying to me, Dennis. And I just, no. I've done all the gurus. But eventually by accident, which is a whole nother story, when I got exposed to Grant within 3 minutes of the start of that webinar, which I knew was a sales webinar, by the way.
Sure. Yep.
And I bought.
Yep. I did too. Same one.
Within 3 minutes, I'm like, I think your phrase of I've come home. These are my people. This is a tribe that I understand, and I couldn't be more happy with it. What would be some of the best ways for people to be able to reach out and contact you, Tracy?
If you Google up Tracy Curington, the beautiful thing about a name like Curington and Tracy is they're usually not together. So I probably occupy the first 10 pages on Google search, which is awesome. And I got to credit my executive assistant for helping me all with that. That, by the way, that's my oldest son. But he's done the SEO on that. You can just Google up Tracy Curington. It'll show you Instagram. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and some of these I don't even have on my phone because I'm not, to Grant's point, I'm not being consumed by them. But anyway, so yeah, you can find me at LinkedIn. Probably my handle on LinkedIn is probably going to be 180 turnarounds. But yeah, you can hunt me up any of those ways. If nothing else, just email me, Tracy@tmccoaching.org is the handle on that.
Tracy at tmccoaching.org. That is the greatest place to go, folks. We will have those links in the show notes. Tracy, I want to thank you so much for giving us your valuable time. We've gone a lot longer than what I had shared to you we would, but there's so much more to talk about on this topic. Folks, we want you to reach out. Make sure you go and buy The Toughest Challenges for Servant Leaders. You will not regret it. It is an awesome book. I always go and read books on servant leadership myself. Like, seriously, go click the link. The 13 chapters, book ended, as Tracy described, around conflict and then how to let staff go. Like, you couldn't ask for a better set of bookends for the book, and everything in between is absolutely worth the read.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. And folks, remember, if you haven't got any of these books above me right into your library, please go and get them. We've got our Business Mastery series that I authored with Alison Wheeler. We've also got Disruption, Leadership Matters, and Yes for Success, and also my very first book, which didn't quite make bestseller status, but it was my first go, What Really Matters for Young Professionals. And of course, if you're looking to grow your business and or to apply servant leadership in your book, particularly if you're in Australia or New Zealand, make sure you reach out and click the links below. Once again, folks, we thank you for joining us on the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast, and we look forward to having you with us next time.